Welcome back to another episode of what did Justin break on his car this time, but he's going to show you how to fix it. From the title, you guys could probably already figure out what the issue is or what I broke. I broke the I didn't break the drive shaft. The center bearing went bad on it, and that's what we're going to be replacing today. And some of the symptoms from a bad center bearing or bad drive shaft center bearing is when you drive or you accelerate, it sounds like a bunch of rocks are, underneath the car hitting and it's moving around. Or sometimes if you turn and give it some gas or even just turn, it just sounds awful, especially if the bearing is super bad. Let's go through some of the specialty tools that I got and also the part that needs to be replaced, which is a bearing. All right, we'll start with the bearing. This is the part that needs to be replaced. Ooh, a sticker. Here's the bearing. Can you guess what these are? I'll show you in a sec. This is a specialty tool. This is a drive shaft alignment tool that comes with, or it doesn't come with it, but I highly suggest purchasing one of these. People have made, you can make your own. I've seen it online where they have, either they use wood or things like that, but you know what? Let's just use the professional tool in the correct way and we can make sure that the drive shaft is aligned correctly when we put it back. Extra adapters that go in here. And here's the adapter number. I mean, it even says specialized. Is that what that is in German? I don't know. I don't know German. Here's another card. There's some confusion on which one to use on the model. I think the other one's like a 2905 or something like that. We'll see if it's the correct one or not. A lot of people have complained about when they replace the drive shaft or do this job that they get tons of vibrations underneath. And that's mainly because they're not using a drive shaft alignment tool and maybe they're not marking it off properly or things like that. Or if you buy a brand new drive shaft, they're out of balance. I just had a friend, he had a shop do they did his drive shaft 3 or 4 times and each drive shaft he got was out of balance. And finally, the shop sent the drive shaft off to to a drive shaft shop, and they said it was way unbalanced. So if you do buy new, just be aware that you might want to have it checked out before you install it. If you're going to reuse your old drive shaft and put install a center bearing for it, don't forget to mark between where the drive shaft lines up and everything like that on mainly the diff end and in the center bearing area. And then don't forget the direction the bearing goes in as well. We have to remove a few things before we could even get to the drive shaft as it's buried up underneath the car. The exhaust, we're going to have to remove that. There's a heat shield. After we take the exhaust up, that'll have to come off. And then on the transmission on the back of it, there's a nose that we have to pull that off, or it's a covering, a shield that has to come off as well. And that'll give us access to the drive shaft. We're going to start by loosening up my wideband sensor. I just need it loose. I don't have to take it all the way off until I start dropping the exhaust. It'll make it easier to do that then. We'll wait. Next, I'm going to take off the V-band clamps. not everyone has the same exhaust, so things are a little different on how people take them off, but you do want to remove the exhaust. One thing that should be the same is this bracket here. That comes off. It's with a Torx. I think it's a T45. The hard one to get is up here. You just have to remember that this isn't a stock exhaust. Stock exhaust, this whole area would be filled with a muffler. My muffler is right there. So it's a little different, but sometimes I think a stock exhaust comes off easier. As long as it's not rusted, like if you're an East Coast car, it's probably a pain in the butt, but it is a T45. Now we gotta support the exhaust. It is a little heavy, or it's awkward. It's not really heavy, it's just awkward how it sits. So at this point, before you start, you can loosen some stuff a little bit, but we need to find a way to support this exhaust so it doesn't just fall. And the hard bolt to get is this one over here. If you guys are cool like me, you could use a trash can and your rolling chair to support the exhaust. Missing a bolt for here, a 13 mil. With the vibrations this car makes, you know, undoubtedly a lot of this stuff comes loose. Next we have these 13s that have to come off, and then there's 13s right there. So these two and those two, and then, you know, we had these as well, but I was missing one. Exhaust is off, as you can see. It's totally missing. Let's go ahead and take this heat shield off. It's just 4 10mm bolts. Some of you guys might be missing this heat shield. Over the years, a lot of this stuff just disappears. Mechanics don't reinstall it and they get lazy. I've had a bunch of these cars come through where they're missing all the heat shields underneath. You know what that's from? Yeah, the center bearing. I don't know if you guys could see this or not, but look at this. Woo! I'd say that center bearing is not there anymore. Yeah, it's time for replacement. After playing with floppy for a while, the drive shaft. We need to mark the drive shaft we need to mark the drive shaft where it connects to the rear diff. And then we could there we go. My horrible handwriting. That way we know the direction it's supposed to go. Next, we're going to go ahead and take this nose off. It's just 2 45 Torx. Now you can see you have access to take those Allen bolts out. They do call for replacing, there's a gasket that goes in here. between the drive shaft and the rear of the transmission, and it'll be on the same on the rear diff as well. You can replace those or reuse them. Another thing that they call for is when these bolts come out, they actually supposed to only be one-time single use, and they do suggest chasing the threads. I've always reused these bolts. I just clean all the threads and then I red Loctite and stick it back in. It's up to you how you want to roll on that. We're going to loosen all these bolts. They're 6mm hex. We're going to loosen those, and then there's the two, I think they're 13mm bolts for the center bearing. It helps to have an impact gun. If you don't have one, this would probably be a two-person job where one person has to hold the rear wheel while you break these bolts loose. Woo. I'd say these are in there. Those are in there, folks. Man. Oh. Of course, it's going to be one of them, right? Nope, that one ain't coming out. That one's stripped. We're gonna have to cut it out. That kind of sucks. Stuff doesn't always go to plan, but at least we have ways of fixing it. Loose. That one's loose. Let's take it out. I don't know if we want to take it out all the way, but here we go. We'll take a few of these bolts out so we don't have to take all of them out when we... Next, we gotta loosen this drive shaft, or loosen it off the nose of the diff. Ah, it came loose. There's a little channel right here. And usually how I get these off is I hit that with the screwdriver and hammer, you know, just a little slight this way, and that usually loosens it. Again, we will just leave one bolt on. Let's go ahead and put this drive shaft alignment tool on. Now we have to make sure that we're not hitting any of the weights, that they're not in the way. There's one there. So we're going to turn this. All right. The longer spread goes to the front and the smaller spread goes to the rear. I don't like how this bar is not hitting the drive shaft, so I'm going to add a spacer, the extra ones I bought. We'll go ahead and take the 13mm center bearing bolts off. Don't forget you might have little spacers too. Let's remove the drive shaft. We'll take those two bolts that we left in there out. There we go. Let's go ahead and remove the drive shaft. Use the bolt extractor. Hopefully we'll get this bolt out. We'll see. The bolt is totally bent. That's crazy. Onto the drive shaft. Let's replace that center bearing. Alright guys, well this is cleaning. We're going to go ahead, I set the drive shaft up here. We're going to go ahead and take this bolt out. 17mm wrench. And a screwdriver so I could, you'll see how it goes. Get my gear wrench and hopefully that'll help if it fits. All right, bolt and washer out. And before I forget, let's mark the two drive shafts so we can put it together in the same spot. So guys, I forgot to push record. These are apart. And the way I did it, I had this bolt in the hole where it's supposed to go, and then I used a crowbar and this hammer and just hit on that bolt so it was kind of like this. I hit the bolt and it eventually all came loose. Sorry I didn't show that because I didn't push record. So after a lot of expletives, I finally got the bearing off. A lot of people, oh, it slides off pretty easy, just hit it a few times. Yeah, that wasn't the case. And see what happened to the drive shaft? I suspect that this drive shaft is going to be heavily out of balance now. I'm going to try to repair this a little bit, clean it up, but I have a feeling once all this goes back together and I start driving around, this thing's just going to vibrate like crazy, and at that point I'm just going to end up buying a new drive shaft. Whether I buy a one piece or a OEM two piece is still up in the air, but I'm going to try it. I'm going to put it together, clean some of this up, and see what happens. It's cleaned up a little bit better, but I don't know, man. We'll try it. This part of the bearing, we already talked about how it goes on. It goes on this direction. This next part is, you're supposed to clean all this stuff up and then chase these threads according to me. The bearing is ready to be pushed back on. We'll go ahead and do that. The simplest way to do that is have a socket. This is 1 1/8, and it just goes over just like that, and you hit it with a hammer and it'll push this back in, unless you have a press and you can press it in. That looked like it did the trick. It's seated. Looks good. All right. So it's together. Let's go ahead and... Earlier you guys saw that I put everything in a parts cleaner, and it did a pretty good job. It cleaned it. I also cleaned the threads off too. Get some red Loctite on this. Made that nice and tight, or as tight as you can. I don't think there's a torque number on it because technically this is not a serviceable part. Next we're going to go ahead and install the drive shaft alignment tool. Don't forget to add your CV grease when you want to put this back, or add new grease to it. I had some extras from the years of doing CV boots. Now remember, we got to line up the marks. When I do this, I'm only going to put one bolt in. I'm not going to put Loctite on it. I'll pull it out and put Loctite back on it when I put it in. It's just to hold this thing up. You'll actually want to put 2 bolts in to keep it from turning. But my alignment marker is right there, and then the alignment marker I have set up on my drive shaft, so I'm ready to go. I think drive shaft is up, pins up. So I have these bolts in here just loose. I'm gonna go ahead and pull this one out and go ahead and start Loctiting and putting the washer or the lock washer on it with these. I'm just gonna cinch them down, cinch everything down, look at the alignment, make sure everything's good, and then I'm going to then start tightening things up. I have the drive shaft alignment tool, but drive shafts are very finicky. If they're off balance or anything like that, you're gonna get vibrations. Mostly freeway speeds, you'll really notice them. So I can't guarantee if you do this center bearing procedure that you're not gonna get vibrations. There are so many different things. If you look at the Audi repair manual or for installing a drive shaft, there's a lot that goes into it. All I'm doing here is I'm making sure it's straight with this drive shaft alignment bar. And that's about all I could do. The only thing I'm lucky about is that I'm just replacing, I'm putting the original drive shaft back in the exact spot that it was in before. And hopefully that doesn't cause vibration issues. It shouldn't, but there's always that possibility. Just heads up for that, you guys. Next, we're going to install the center bearing. Now, Audi calls for different size spacers depending on what your needs are. I am hoping that the ones that came with it will work. And I don't, with everything locked in place, the bar, I'm hoping that these just slide right in and it'll be awesome if they do. When these are in, you're supposed to slide the drive shaft all the way forward, mark it, and then all the way back and mark it, and then put that thing in the center. And I'm gonna go ahead and do that as well so you could see. I'm hoping it's just in the exact spot it was before, but I'll do it so you guys can see, you know, how we do it or how it's done. Mark it all the way forward, mark it, and then you want it in the middle. So it's marked. Let's go ahead and center it and tighten it down. Cinch it down. It doesn't say Now, since everything's in and it's centered as they say it is, I am going to tighten these down. It's 25 Newton meters, I believe. If it's different than 25, I'll put it, you'll see something come up below. But I believe it's 25 Newton meters. I'm going to go ahead and tighten those down. Alright, let's go ahead and remove the alignment tool and hope that it did its job. And now let's go ahead and tighten all these bolts. Now, some people do a cross pattern, stuff like that. It's supposed to be 55 Newton meters. I'm going to snug them down first and then go back and tighten them down. Now it's time to torque them down to 55 Newton meters, and this is where the fun begins. Because you're going to have to go, either you have a friend hold the back wheel for you so it doesn't move, or you have to keep getting up and down and pulling the e-brake. Which is what I'm going to do. I can hit 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'll do those 4. You know, it's kind of hard to do a cross pattern, but that's just the reality. And same in the back, I could hit 4 as well. So I'll do all 4 of those and then turn it, and then I'll do the other ones, and then I'll go do a spot check because we don't want these coming loose. Next, we're going to reinstall this cover, 45 torques. Now the book calls for 25 Newton meters. Next, we'll do the heat shield, little 10mm push-ons. When you put this back on, make sure you have to keep it away from the drive shaft. If you look, I pushed this one a little too close one time, and it made a loud noise driving, and it burned a hole through it. So make sure you leave enough room, space for the drive shaft, but then you also have to make enough space for the exhaust, so it's a fine line to get this correct. And sometimes you don't get it correct because I didn't. Next, I'll be installing the exhaust. Now, everybody's exhaust is different, so I'm not going to go over how I do mine, but you guys could watch. But I'm not going to go into details about it because everyone's exhaust is different. final thoughts on this. When you go out and test drive this car and you get strong vibrations again, especially on the freeway, you may want to spend the $1,500 to $2,000 and just buy an OEM new drive shaft. That's about all you could do. This is just the cheap way to do it, and maybe save some money along the way on doing it yourself. Or how my drive shaft was, you could always send it off to a good drive shaft shop that could try to balance it, and you could go that route as well. But it is a lot of work. You would have to pull it all out again. So just cross your fingers when you go for a drive that it doesn't vibrate too bad. I mean, it might vibrate a little bit, but it doesn't annoy you that much. But if it vibrates a lot, that's a problem. And I won't know that until I take this car out and try it out, and I just hope it's okay. And I know it'll be better than it was, because that drive shaft was flopping all over the place without that center bearing. But again, guys, until next time, keep on wrenching.